I'd like you to maybe tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your story.
Sure, absolutely. So it's Michael, believe it or not.
Michael.
And no worries. I know this is a constant problem of mine, so this is not new. But yeah, no, my parents, they had me. They named me Michael because it was my father's middle name, and my mother decided that if she drops the E, it somehow becomes feminine. But it serves my need to feel special. So, but yeah, no, my name is Michal Ricca, and I am a founder of Now I Can Read, and I've been doing this literacy work with children one-on-one for the last 20 years. And yeah, I mean, I think, COVID was tricky for many of us. And in March of last year, I went fully virtual, like most of us had to, and haven't worked with a student in person since. So I will say that at first it was really difficult, and then the Zoom fatigue is real, and was exhausted, and actually ended up in a pretty severe concussion because of a ski episode. So at the end of January, I was in a ski accident and was symptom free. And so then I went back and stared at the screen for the next 13 hours. And 24 hours later, sure enough, was with a concussion. So I haven't been working with students since, which has just been really interesting. I think, because I wasn't able to look at screens, it's been a forced pause for me. And I think which has been a really good thing. And my husband created a LinkedIn account for me, which I had never done, because Now I Can Read just always functioned by referrals and never needed to, really quote unquote network, and just kind of existed in my little pocket of Vermont. And on LinkedIn, I realized, oh my goodness, there truly is a whole world, right? And there, a lot of times in Vermont, it feels like, for 20 years, I've been kind of in this little corner, echoing by myself, saying dyslexia is real. It's a real thing. Everybody pay attention. And to be able to have those connections with people all around the world, of people like you, and we're all fighting the good fight, right? And so my husband encouraged me to start my own podcast, so that I felt like I could be creative still and still feel like I was spreading awareness and being an advocate. And I did that. And I hired 2 amazing professionals that have taken over the majority of my students that I had to leave. So they're now working virtually with a woman from Fraser Academy in Vancouver, and we have another doctor in New Jersey that has taken over and done amazing. And that's allowed me to kind of focus on my next kind of direction. So I'm going to be moving into, we're calling it Redefy Learning. And it's going to be an online platform and a community and membership for families who have someone in their family with dyslexia.
That's amazing. Such a great story, and I hope you're actually feeling better from that accident in January. Why did you, 20 years of experience? That's a large amount of experience, and I'm wondering why you went in that direction and why you wanted to support, children specifically with dyslexia. Do you have any specific reason?
For sure. I think I was one of those rare kids that, always knew that what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be a teacher, and went and got my bachelor's degree at Providence in elementary special ed, and then went and did 2 years of service in Chicago. And even though it was called Inner City Teaching Corps, and so most people that came in to do this 2 years of service, they had no teaching background, but it was, we were all kind of teaching in the inner city of Chicago. And I had 42 second graders, and we were living in community. I had 8 roommates, and we were living in like an abandoned, like rectory. And but even after those 2 years, I went and kind of sold out to the suburbs. And no matter what, every year I would end feeling like I missed kids, or I didn't have enough minutes with kids, or whether it was first grade, second grade, or I was doing pull-out special education, I always felt like I don't know, I made it about time, and there just wasn't enough time. So I formally left, kind of the system. And then even though I had special education, I felt like, as a classroom teacher, as a special ed pull-out teacher, I had no idea how to teach a kid how to read. And I think a lot of teachers are afraid to say that, because we are supposed to know how to teach a child how to read. But I mean, gosh, you're talking about a bachelor's degree, you're talking about a master's from Northwestern University, and I still don't really know what needs to be done in order to really teach a child how to read and write. So that's when I did a deep dive into Orton Gillingham, and started the path of working with kids one-on-one. And once that started happening, and I started seeing the progress and kind of, the numbers speak for themselves, there was just kind of no turning. Yeah.
That's so interesting, because I have no teaching background at all. I'm just a dyslexic guy. But when we started Dystech, we really had to sort of educate ourselves about dyslexia, and sort of diving a bit deep into the science of dyslexia, and then which ultimately leads you very, very fast to what's reading, and all the different reading concepts that exist, and all the different things that you need to know in order to be able to be an efficient reader. And it's definitely true that it's for me, very overwhelming. There's a lot of different concepts, a lot of different things to understand, cognitive processes. But I'm assuming what you're mentioning is something that I observe as well, is that normal teacher who have been educated on how to teach child and students not necessarily have this grasp on exactly how to teach someone how to read. But I don't think, in my opinion, maybe you can tell me what you think, but like, reading is so complicated. There's so much things to understand, and it's like, so how do you think like I'm not sure, but it's like some people say teachers should do more, and they should be more aware. I agree with this, but on the other side, when I look at the amount of complexity and the amount of knowledge that you need to sort of understand in order to really be agile in your teaching is quite huge. What's your thought on this? Because as a teacher, it would be quite hard and really demanding in terms of time and studying for a teacher to be able to really study reading and be able to put. What's your view on that?
It's really interesting. There's a few things. Number one, they say teaching is the only profession that eats its young. And it's true. I think turnover rates are unlike any other profession, and it's incredibly difficult. And especially, this year, I can't imagine how many teachers will unfortunately leave the field after this year. But they also say that teaching reading really is rocket science. And I think it's always changing and it's always improving. And so for people like me who really geek out on that stuff, it's okay because it's like, wow, there's a new tool, or oh, there's a really cool new way to really make sure that they're actively reading and blah, blah, I think that's great. But yeah, no, it is incredibly difficult. I think even just from a basic standpoint, I think we're getting better with teacher prep, and we're making sure that real structured literacy training is happening at certain institutions, and there are programs that are being accredited now so that we know that these people actually really know what they're talking about and doing. But yeah, I mean, systematically, it's kind of a mess, right? You've got someone at the helm that's supposed to know what they're doing, and they really just don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's sad because you can see often, sometimes there's frustration on both sides, from the family side, from the teacher side.
Yeah.
And so and it's because of the complexity. I think you're right. It's quite complicated, and hence why there's a whole module of teaching just based on dyslexia, because you actually have to dive a little bit deep into the details of how your brain works, what things to learn. And from your experience, Michal, you like, throughout the 20 years that you've been helping families and hundreds of kids, what has changed? Did anything change since you started really helping those students, and until now? Did you observe any major things? Do you feel that society now is actually a bit more aware of dyslexia? I'm assuming 20 years ago it might be a bit less awareness about dyslexia.
Yeah, I mean, there's the world of reading is pretty controversial, and there's all these reading wars, and Lucy Hawkins is all of a sudden the devil, and I think there's a pendulum that goes back and forth, right? And so I think Lucy Hawkins is amazing, and she has amazing viewpoints to bring to the world of reading too. And I think what's been interesting is that I'm also a parent of a child who has dyslexia, and I knew that he had dyslexia when he was like less than 1. It's just like kind of an occupational hazard. But because of that, we were, he had early speech therapy. We were rhyming. We were doing writing in sand from the go. So he's pretty remediated. But I think in a lot of ways that can be really difficult because, as a mom and as his advocate, there would have to be a lot of meetings that were really tricky, because they would say, he's fine. I don't know what you're talking about. He really doesn't need anything at all. And we really waited until he was probably in 5th grade. Yeah, he was in 5th grade when we had him formally diagnosed, because that was when things were really starting to pick up in school, and things were starting to get harder for him, and things were taking longer for him. And but that advocacy piece, I don't know. I've had to do it for the last 2 decades for students, and I don't know. I like to, I try to be a hopeful person, and I do think that there is more awareness, and I do think that teachers are, they tend to be, I guess, more aware. But I think unfortunately most parents are still waiting for teachers to tell them, you should really do something, or something's up with. I think there's a huge division of, well, why didn't you tell me? Or I should have known this. How come you didn't say anything to me? And I think what I've come to realize over the years is that parents are going to have different expectations and outcomes for their child than the school is. And that's your child. You have accountability in that situation as well. But I mean, I think every teacher truly is doing their best with what they have. I think and every parent is doing the best that they can with what they have and what they know. And my hope is that the more awareness that is spread and the more we talk about, hey, like people, we're talking about 1 in 5 people. This is not an uncommon thing. And unfortunately, 4 of the 5 probably aren't diagnosed and are, just have pretty wildly inaccurate thoughts of who they are. And those are pretty formative years to be building such an inaccurate identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's can lead to terrible life, unfortunately. I think there's been a study made in the US that, sort of like us probably sort of predict that there's about 60% of the people in jail in the US who are potentially dyslexic with literacy problems. So, I think there's a case to be made at any level from, the government level to the community level to the family and school level as well. So in your view, I'll be interested to see what you think is, one of the biggest challenge or biggest problem for dyslexic today, in society and in the whole system that we've built as a society. What do you think is one of the big challenges, I guess, or problem, if you want to call it like this, that sort of impeach a lot of dyslexic to be able to, be who they are and be, I would say, a good functioning citizen in today's society, right? Being able to have the same opportunity and learn at the same pace.
Yeah. Well, I think COVID has taught me that it's really, I think the biggest hurdle that we have to get over is the piece of isolation and shame. And, what has kind of like propelled me into this new direction is that post-concussion, I was really looking at my life, right? And, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've always loved what I've done. I've always loved my job. And, but I ran myself into the ground because I just wasn't able to say no to families. I didn't really have anywhere else to send them that I felt like you're in good hands. And, I was doing 13-hour days one-on-one with kids. And I looked back and I'm like, wait a second. I looked at my schedule and a lot of those kids were coming to me one-on-one for 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years, like kids I'm carrying kids through, middle school, junior high, high school, getting them to college. And they're only coming once a week. And I'm like, well, that's not really structured literacy. And, we're really just working on a lot of times with structured literacy, the decoding and the reading comes a lot faster than the encoding and the spelling and the writing. And so we, in those ending years, we're really working on written expression. And I'm doing these sessions one-on-one, well, at the time, through a computer, but I'm saying the same things over and over and over again. I'm saying, oh, why didn't you do voice typing for that assignment? Or why weren't you doing co-writer? Or did you run it through Grammarly before you handed it in? And, I realized I was really expecting these kids who at their developmental stage are just, they're pretty allergic to being different and they just want to blend, right? That's what every middle schooler wants to do is just blend. And so I just started thinking, I think 20 years ago, I became so adverse to groups because, I think we all think, oh, you can get so much better success out of one-on-one. But then I just started to really think about, well, virtual's cool in a lot of ways. Where are you right now?
Melbourne.
Yeah,
Australia.
Melbourne. Australia is talking to me in Vermont. This is pretty cool, and and I'm just imagining, imagine if all these kids were really practicing these skills together and they're all over the East Coast or the Central Coast. And then all of a sudden we're building one in Australia and we're, the kids now have a place of belonging and a community. And it's a safe space to be able to practice those skills. And not only that, but it's also a community for families to come together because, you know, being a mom of a child with special needs, I also understand that isolation is probably one of the biggest things and problems that we have to beat with that situation, because we just think we're the only one, and we think you know, everything is just hard for us. But you know, like I'm telling you that it's not true, and I've literally for the last 20 years heard the same story over and over and over again from kids, from mom, from dad, from families. We are a lot more alike than we think, and I just think that we are also a lot stronger together, and I think that a lot could be accomplished if we had that safe place to belong.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I think that being able to reach out to people who have the same challenges as you is moral boosting, right? You're like, I'm not the only one here, and there's actually many other people around me. And it's very true, you know, when we look at all those Facebook group and you have those thousands and thousands of people just here, you know, helping one another, and you have a new member, a mom or a dad coming in and say, hey, my child's been diagnosed dyslexic, what do I do? And you're like 10 minutes later, you've got like 50 different comments with all the people saying, hey, I did that. So there's such a, it's very inspiring to see the dyslexic community and how supportive people are to one another. So yeah, I think
too, like you were just saying that, you know, you were talking about that like pipeline to prison. And I feel like that is a really common dialogue around, you know, dyslexia, and it drives me insane. Like because I really want to flip that dialogue, and I want to start talking with our students, and I want to start talking with families so that they're talking this way in their homes. We need to be talking about the 40% of entrepreneurs that have dyslexia, and you know, these are the creative geniuses that are going to become our CEOs of our next companies, and they need to hear that as much as we need to hear that as parents. I think sometimes when parents hear dyslexia, they're like, what is that? Is that a life sentence? You know, like, does this mean they're going to go to prison? Does this mean they're never going to learn how to read? But actually there's quite a few gifts that come along with it. And we don't talk about those nearly enough. And I think that's exactly what needs to be talked about more.
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to agree. I tend definitely to agree with that. And I also have I've had this interesting discussion with other guests, and, you know, talking about label or not label, you know. But definitely, I think, you know, community is certainly a great way to sort of like, you know, be stronger, like you've mentioned. And as well, I think, you know, being with the internet now, we can discuss and we can have a chat on the other side of the globe, and we can sort of share story of people who are actually either very successful or have been helping those families for 20 years with a wealth of experience, and sort of grasp and try and share this as much as we can in terms of, well, what's going on, what's the reality here for family and that sort of thing. In terms of education system, maybe I'll tell you one of my thought, and, you know, it might be wrong, but that's one of my thoughts. And it's like, you know, there's been this study made on stress that sort of proved to some extent that, you know, if you in a stressed environment and you do a test, it seems that you sort of lose about 20% of your cognitive ability, right? And so you might actually be
probably low.
Yeah,
and so higher than that.
Yeah, and so my and that's kind of related to dyslexia. It's like, well, if that's the case, if we're able to prove this scientifically speaking, you know, shouldn't we multiply every score by 1.2 to add a 20% loss because of the stressed environment? Isn't that something that's logical? And on the other side, you know, it's like, it's the same for dyslexia. It's like, well, it's clear, like, it's been established that dyslexia is much more common than, I don't know, ADHD, for example.
Right.
Right? There's no question about this. There's been many studies,
Right.
and it's like, well, shouldn't we like really actually put stuff in place everywhere,
Yeah.
since it's been clearly identified that there is a very large amount of the population in the world who has this learning disorder.
Right.
But in your view, what's your if you could change one thing in education, what would it be?
It's a really good question because I would want to change a lot, but
Yeah,
yeah, I know.
I
I
know.
think I got really tired and just emotionally drained. Doing this during COVID was really interesting because I was all of a sudden in people's homes, and they
Yeah.
would either be in my home office or I would go to their school. I was never in people's homes, and I had, at least I would say maybe 10 to 20 times I had a parent just sobbing on the computer screen like this. And
Mm.
I think I just grew really tired of fighting systems. And I had my years at the state house, the rah and like joining all the advocacy groups. And I think I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to build something better because I just can't, it's too tiring trying to fight something that's just so much bigger than you. And
Yeah.
I think it's funny because with Readify Learning, which is going to be the group kind of like product of Now I Can Read, my business coach wanted me to like consider what my competitors were. And I was like, I don't really, I'm like, well, first of all, I was like, I don't think I have any. And she was like, every entrepreneur thinks they don't have competitors, and I'm like, okay, well, I didn't know that, but and then I started thinking about it like as a mom, and I was like, well, what's a competitor to having, a group structured, literacy program, but like that also, addresses, like skills of like mental health skills of, like resilience and grit and writing and all these things. And I'm like, I think it's probably the sports field. It's probably gymnastics. It's probably horseback riding. We as parents, we just all try to find something that our kids can feel successful and confident in. And then we just kind of like, well, at least they feel good about themselves over there. Or I think maybe the competitor to Readify is like maybe therapy, or like you said with ADHD, maybe it's medication. And I think, for me, what I believe and what I want is that, every kid not only deserves to learn how to read and write well, but they deserve to feel successful in an academic setting. And that's not happening where they are in most places, and I heard my 7th grade son be in virtual schooling all year this year. And I could hear him going, wait, what? What, huh? And he didn't have his friends with him to say, what page is she saying? Wait, what does she want us to do? And, you talk about stress. And I think, he, and I'm sure most, are just on a processing, like, like they maybe caught 5 minutes of the 40.
Yeah.
And so systematically, we need to create a place where kids can feel successful in an academic setting.
Yeah.
All kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good challenge to have. It's a large and complicated problem.
Right.
It's interesting. I just want to come back to the point that you've mentioned, look at your competitor. And, when we started Dystech, it was sort of the same. We had, we look at what other people were doing, move it on the line. And then, we just realized that, they were quite hard to find. And it's like, if they're hard to find, it's good. It means that there's not enough.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
there's a massive need, and if you're struggling to find someone who does something or want to do something similar to you, it means that you don't have to worry too much, and
But
if you're
but it
doing,
also means you have to prove that it's needed, and I
yeah,
think a lot of times as a teacher and as a mom, I feel like I've seen, and as a professional, I've seen a wide range of understanding of what kids are supposed to know when it comes to reading and writing and math, and where they're supposed to be in 7th grade math. And so that range is already there, but a lot of parents, they do prioritize that, and they say, okay, learning to read is important and learning to write is important. They prioritize that, but I think we're not always keenly aware of really knowing kids' levels of motivation, and what's happening in their heads, that self-talk, and how kids are, like you said, generally feeling when they are in that academic setting. I don't think we know. And the more kids are kind of in their head about that all the time, it's really hard to undo. And
yeah,
I was interviewing a young woman in the UK who has dyslexia, and she's really cute. She said, I just talk to myself all the time. And so she said, in one of my first jobs, I was talking to myself out loud, and her employer said, Zoe, you like to talk to yourself, don't you? And she's like, yeah, I don't know. It's just a thing I do. It helps me kind of blah, blah, blah. And she goes, well, you really talk to yourself pretty negatively, and if you ever want to talk about that, I'm here. And, I think, that first step of just awareness is really important. And what I want to really get across with Readify learning is that those are not uncontrollable. Like our thoughts, we all have at least 50,000 thoughts a day, but I mean, the neuroscience is finally proving it, that we actually are in control of our thoughts. And, it's a skill that's taught, and it's a skill that needs to be practiced. We're not just born dyslexic or not. We are born with the ability to change the way that we think and the way that we want to live our life. And I think the more we can talk about that inner negative thought and verbalize it, whether it's in writing or whether it's with a peer that really understands you, we're going to get to a place where, we're not talking about that dyslexia to prison pipeline anymore.
Amazing. What would you say to a student with dyslexia who's listening to us now?
I would say have hope, and that hope is stronger than fear, and that there's not one kid that's not afraid of anything, even though middle schoolers have more armor than anyone I've ever met. But to choose courage over comfort, and just live out loud and advocate for yourself. Speak up when something's hard. Ask a question when you don't understand, because there's probably at least 5 other kids that don't understand. And try not to personalize the things that are hard.
That's amazing. Such an inspiring discussion, Michal. Thank you so much for your time. Now, I'd like you to tell us, where can people reach out to you, and where can they find you?
So I have kind of an archaic website. It's Now I Can Read, but I built it a very long time ago. My cousin Keela Gendron made my new website called Readify Learning, and it was kind of a fun play on words, because when we were coming up with the name, I just wanted it to encompass courage and bravery, and because I feel like that's what our students are doing every day when they show up. And But I also think, defy is going to be a word that's spelled, misspelled like a million different ways, and people are just not going to get to that website. So if you go to Now I Can Read and then just click on groups, it'll bring you to Readify Learning to just learn more about what's going on with that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you. I'm sure there's going to be amazing advice and information to get from our discussion. And I look forward to chatting with you further.
Absolutely.